the state has obligations to get things done. We have to have the highway patrol out there making sure people aren't speeding. We have to have the OEPA out there making sure that our lakes are healthy and our rivers are healthy. We need to have ODNR out there to make sure our natural resources are being protected and all of that. So that's half the equation, which isn't really realistic. Prisons. We spend in Ohio roughly $2.2 billion over the biennium on prisons. And that, if you add the state payroll and prisons, you're talking about $6.2 billion or so. We spend in higher education about $2.3 billion, which is the state share of operating revenue for all our colleges and community colleges in the state. So $8.5 billion sort of roughly broke down. These aren't precise figures. You could lay everybody off in state government. You could stop funding prisons, and you could stop funding higher education, and you'd get at $8.5 billion. That's how big $8.5 billion is in the state budget context. Well, what's particularly challenging about this state budget is what's really driving a lot of the problems that we have. It's a revenue problem. That we're seeing income tax collections go down pretty precipitously because the economy has gone down dramatically. And state government, unlike federal government, it's a much different process when you set the budget. In federal government, you basically set your level of spending. This is what we're going to spend. It doesn't matter what you get in revenue, because whatever it is, you're going to spend this, and whichever you don't have, you put on the national debt, which is one of the reasons why we have a $12 or $13 trillion national debt. State budgeting process is much significantly different. We actually have a constitutional requirement that says we can't spend more than we take in. So as a result, we have much more variability than the federal government does when it comes to our budget, because if our income tax goes down, our collections go down, if our sales tax collections go down, if our contributions from the federal government go down, we have just less money to spend, and we can't go out and borrow the money in order to pay the expenses during the short haul. Now, long term, that probably gives some benefits because we don't run up a deficit, we don't put ourselves in debt, we don't max out our credit card, we don't wake up one day and find out we have $50,000 on a credit card bill, but it creates practical problems for how we budget in Ohio. So that's where being creative is much more important in state budgeting than it is oftentimes in federal budgeting as well. As we sort of work through this process, one other thing to remember is when you look at all funds, Medicaid is about 40% of our state budget. So we spend about 40% of all the dollars that we spend in the state operating budget on Medicaid. And that's really a big challenge that we have, because Medicaid, it's important and we have to provide these services. But one of the challenges we have, everything okay? Got it?
Sorry.
Oh, it's okay, it's okay. One of the challenges that we have is that as that portion grows and grows and grows and revenues go down, it starts to squeeze into education, starts to squeeze in the resources that we can give our elementary schools and our high schools and our colleges and all that sort of thing. So one of the tricky things to work around in Medicaid is that there's not as much flexibility to be as creative in Medicaid as you can be in some other things, because Medicaid is a joint state-federal program. And what that means is that the federal government puts in a certain amount and the state puts in a certain amount. And whenever a dollar is put in there, one of the issues that you have is the federal government comes in and says, well, hey, state of Ohio, if we're going to give you this money, you're going to have to do things in a certain way. You can't do what you think might make a whole lot of sense, but it might not make a whole lot of sense. And I'll give you one example of that. In Ohio, we have a system of long-term care. This is nursing home care. That it creates a bias of putting people in a nursing home. Just the way it's structured, that sort of the default is let's put somebody in a nursing home on Medicaid. Well, each person in Ohio who's on Medicaid in a nursing home costs the state of Ohio about $55,000 a year. And so as you start to work through that, Medicaid is an entitlement program. If you qualify, the state of Ohio is then, all of us are on the hook for $55,000 per person in that nursing home. Well, one of the things that you can do that's smart and creative is there are more appropriate levels of care that don't cost as much. So for example, assisted living. Assisted living costs on average about $24,000 to $27,000, depending on how you define assisted living, which is about half what you're paying in a nursing home, and it gives people a lot more independence to have some more flexibility, to have family around them more often, and to not be in quite the institutional setting that they would otherwise be in. You know, an even more cost-effective alternative is keeping people at home, and that's passport coverage. And if you put the typical passport person is about $13,000 a year, and a lot of times that's where people want to be. They want to be at home. They need a little bit of help to keep their independence, but this is where they know, this is where they're most comfortable, and frankly, people find that it's also where they're more able to be healthier, live a healthier lifestyle. So if you start to look at the Medicaid problem in that and recognize that every one of those changes that you can make, you're saving $20,000 a year, which oftentimes is somebody's salary. You know, just to put somebody in an appropriate level of care, you can really start to save money and at the same time improve the quality of the program. Now, we don't have as much flexibility from the federal government to do all that as what we would like, but that's a good example of somebody, if you were to come to the table with that sort of solution and say, look, we can still provide the same type of quality care. In fact, it might even be better care, and it's actually less expensive. You can think creatively that way, and sometimes you have to sort of break through the traditional way of thinking. So, you know, the most important thing, again, is just personal relationships. It's providing solutions. As a legislator, I like to joke sometimes I'm the walking complaint department, which is okay, but I have about 15 times a day somebody tell me what's wrong, something they don't like, something that needs to get fixed. They say, you go out and fix it. I said, well, okay, I'll give it my best shot, but I got 20 other demands and problems that have to get fixed. The thing that always sort of piques me, my curiosity, and the things that I always seem to respond to, and I think most legislators do, say, this is a problem, and here's how you fix it. And the more time you put into thinking about how you would fix it, that is really the more valuable insight that you provide somebody, because legislators are just like everybody else. I mean, we're experts in our small little sliver of the world. You know, and I'm a lawyer by training, so I'm an expert, and I chair the Judiciary Committee, so I can tell you what you have to file to start a lawsuit, and I can tell you how you do all that sort of stuff. But when it comes to building a bridge, you know, and whether we build a span bridge or a concrete bridge or whatever type of bridge, I'm not an expert. So we have to go to the engineers and talk to people who know that sort of thing. Same thing when you're dealing with developmental disabilities. Trunk does a great job keeping me informed and training me, and Martin does a great job, and I've got a lot of close friends in the developmental disabilities community who've given me a lot, but I don't live with the issues the way that you all live with the issues. And so use that reservoir of knowledge that you have to better educate legislators. And that's really one of the valuable things that you can provide too. So I hope that's helpful information. I wish I had a check for $8 billion and said we sort of figured out how to make all our problems go away. It's going to be a tough budget, but here's some words of encouragement. You know, I'm getting out of state government, so I've made that pretty clear. I'm moving on after this. Mrs. Wagoner, the Ohio Constitution has its version of term limits. Mrs. Wagoner has her version of term limits. And I think it's good and healthy for people to spend some time in public service. There's tremendous sacrifices that go on. When you talk to legislators, you know, I'll be the first one to say, make sure you thank them too for what they do. You might not like their opinions, but you might not like their votes, but what they're doing, when you talk to Randy Gardner and Matt Salassi and Edna Brown, it's an inordinate amount of time away from home. It's a lot of pressure, it's a lot of stress, a lot of people are screaming, and everybody down there, by and large, wants to do the right thing. We disagree about, you know, how best you resolve a problem. But I don't know anybody who's run on an pro-crime, anti-education, anti-developmental disabilities platform. You know, what we spend so much of our time arguing about is how best to solve those problems and how you solve those problems long term. So, you know, as often as you get angry at a legislator, and I get angry at legislators, you know, by and large, most of them are trying to do the best job they can. And so when you talk to these folks, one of the things that you want to do as a guy who's going to be in your shoes in 18 months and banging on legislators too, make sure you thank them, because we don't get that a lot. We get protesters, we get pickets, we get nasty letters, we get a lot of those, but I can count on my hand how many times somebody has said thank you for, you know, missing all the soccer games and missing all that other sort of stuff to try to do what you think is right. And, So I think that goes a long way too.